Hello, good evening, and welcome to UPfront. Tonight, we put a spotlight on the current feud between the opposition NDC and the Judiciary. This comes on the heels of the Attorney General and the President at the Bar Association's annual meeting, jumping to the defense of the Judiciary, insisting the current remarks of the former President John Dramani Mahama are unjustified. Now, on the show today, we'll be hearing from a former President of the Bar Association and a distinguished political scientist, Professor Joseph Achuaye. But first, I also have you, I'm sure like many people you've heard former President Mahama justify his comments by saying it's reflective of the views of the masses of this country who are surveyed by the Afrobarometer report. We will interrogate this with governance and democracy fellow at CDD, John Osai Kwapon. Gentlemen, you're welcome to UPfront.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, let me start with you, Professor Kwapon. It's important that we put this in the proper perspective. The thinking that has influenced the initial response is that what the former president and the NDC is saying is unjustified. His main response is that all of the things he has said is based on a report the CDD has put together. That's the Afrobarometer. And the Afrobarometer justifies a very decreasing interest, if you like, or trust of the Ghanaian people in the judiciary. How factual is this claim?
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening to Professor Aye as well. I've read a lot of his work, so it's a real honor to be on the same platform with you today. But back to the question of the Afrobarometer report and what it captured in terms of trust. So there are two things we have to quickly acknowledge. One, that there's a broader picture of a decreasing trust in institutions overall. So if you look at quite a number of the institutions that are listed in the Afrobarometer survey, you do see very low levels of trust that citizens are saying they do have in them. And they've also been on the decline for a couple of rounds now. So based on the Afrobarometer, there's no dispute about that. When it comes to the judiciary, they are part of our set of institutions. And yes, the Afrobarometer survey does show, in fact, if you look at the most recent round of the Afrobarometer survey, I like to focus on the percentage of citizens who say they trust a given institution a lot, because that depicts an unwavering trust in that institution. And no more than 11% said they trust the courts a lot. Yes, there is another percentage that say they trust the courts somewhat, just a little and not at all. And again, that trend is also reflective in what my analysis of the Afrobarometer survey does reveal for other kinds of institutions as well. So in context, yes, the Afrobarometer does show low levels of trust in the judiciary.
But is this new? Is it only under this government? And can it be perceivably attributed to the judiciary now compared to previous ones? I am asking this question because I saw a similar study that compared trust and perceived corruption in the courts from 2002 to 2019, which has suggested that even in 2014, the general trust which is a lot or somewhat, was actually 44% of the population trusting a lot or somewhat in the courts. How debilitating low is the current levels of trust in the courts?
So let me put this in another context for you, right? So the question of trust has been asked over 9 rounds of the Afrobarometer survey beginning in 1999. If you look at 8 rounds of the survey prior to the 2022 round, for the courts, the highest level of trust ever attained over 8 rounds was 35% of citizens saying they trust the courts a lot. Yes, that's 35%. In the current level, it's 10%, which shows a decline of almost about 15 percentage points. So that is why, again, for me, it raises the question of what is happening, what are the actions or the inactions of the courts that is fueling this growing perception among citizens. Because there was a time where the level of trust reposed in them in the Afrobarometer survey was much higher than we are seeing now. And if you go back to 1999, you would see the levels of trust improving and then declining, improving slightly again, and then declining again in 2022.
I need to ask this question. Is the level of trust a lot in the courts at its all-time low?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get the answer. Forgive me.
Yes, it is. So if you look at 9 rounds of the Afrobarometer survey, this is the lowest that the court is recording in terms of the level of trust that citizens are saying they have in the courts.
I want to explore this because it's important. Exactly what were the questions that the people were asked to elicit the kind of response on the trust of these courts, so people get to understand how you came by this particular understanding?
Okay, so the question says, how much do you trust each of the following, or haven't you heard enough about them to say? And then they list, different institutions: the president, the police, the army, the courts, parliament, your elected local government, electoral commission, MMDCs, traditional leaders, the ruling party, the opposition political parties. So that's how the question is framed. And your response choices are not at all, just a little, somewhat, and a lot.
Now, there is a point that was made by the former president, which is really what was the basis of this. So he says, if people are not poking fun about politics and inducements being used to sway the hand of justice in the lower courts, then it is statements about 7-0 or the unanimous FC verdicts involving mostly cases of a political nature in our Supreme Court. This is an unfortunate but serious development. The other thing he also said is that the image of our judiciary has deteriorated badly, that many of our citizens openly make mockery of our justice system and our justices. The phrase "go to court" is these days met with derisive laughter instead of hope that one will truly get justice at the court. The final point I want to make here is what the former president said. One of the scariest and existential threats to any democracy is when citizens think their judiciary holds no value or use to them. This is the national security threat we are talking about. Now, beyond having to quote the survey as being the basis of it, the very things I said, does any of the things reflect in the survey results that were shared?
So the survey does not capture the why, right? It only asks about the what. So it captures what citizens are saying. I always say that in a survey like the Afrobarometer, how citizens answer these questions is also based on their lived experiences, whether it's their directly lived experiences, the stories they see, the stories they hear, the stories that others share with them. So, for example, some of the comments that you just read are things that I have also seen people write on social media, right? This whole idea of unanimous FC70, all of those things. So there's been, particularly during the election petition hearing, you did see some of these quote unquote jabs at the judiciary. But one of the things that I think it's also very important for us to take into consideration is that I don't think by citizens saying their level of trust in the courts is going down means that they are questioning the legitimacy of the courts, right? Because in the same survey, if in the same Afrobarometer survey, when citizens are asked that courts have the right to make binding decisions that we all have to obey, almost 8 out of 10 do strongly agree with that sentiment. So their levels of trust may be low, but they do not question the legitimacy of the judiciary. And I think, for me, that's the issue at stake here, which is how do we have conversations about concerns we may have about the judiciary, about the courts, without straying into territory that seems to, either scandalize them or call their legitimacy into question. And Brilliant. I think that's the kind of tension that we need to resolve.
Brilliant. So I need you to clarify one more point for me, because it's on the minds of many people. I did hear you say that even though some of the points being made here about low levels of trust in the judiciary are clearly in the Afrobarometer report, the reasoning backing it, the very attributions of why people do not trust the judiciary were not given in the Afrobarometer report. That's what you said.
Correct.
Brilliant. I'll come back to you, but let me introduce Professor Joseph Acquah into this conversation. Prof has for a very long time been writing about public institutions and how they should fare and how they should actually behave in the first place and how governance is supposed to be projected on those levels. Let me get to understand this. Is it strange? Is it unacceptable? In fact, I heard a Supreme Court judge says the current atmosphere is almost like taking us back to 1982, where judges were abducted and killed in this country, burnt alive. Is the current environment reflecting that kind of thing that the judge is making reference to? So forgive me, if you could just unmute for me, Prof. Yes, brilliant. Well, I still struggle to hear you, Prof. We should get that fixed so that we can hear from Professor Joseph Acquah on this particular matter. But I was asking a question that you stressed, Dr. Osai-Kwapon. The question I was asking here is, since the fundamentals for, let's say, the criticism has been established here, you are saying we should be in the position to indeed criticize the judiciary, or even make reference to the trust or waning trust in the judiciary without attacking the legitimacy of the institution.
That's not...
yes, Dr. Acquah, yeah.
And that's always not an easy thing to do. In fact, last week, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court was raising the same issue, which is, he says, look, we don't have a problem when citizens disagree with the decisions that are issued out of the court. We just hope that in disagreeing with the courts, you don't stray into a territory, and I'm paraphrasing his words, but you don't stray into a territory that then delegitimizes the court. And it's the same conversation that the remarks of the former president is sparking among us, which is there is a way to be able to say, I don't agree with this court decision, or I have concerns about this approach that the court took, etc., etc. But it is also very difficult to do that without those who are either part of the institution or feel obligated to defend the institution, not reading a lot more into it beyond some of the quote-unquote legitimate questions that one can ask about institutions. And I think that's the challenge we face in terms of how we have that conversation about any concerns that we may have, whilst at the same time not also delegitimizing critically important institutions like the judiciary in our democratic setup.
Okay, now I understand that point. There is a point that maybe would actually evidence what you're saying. For example, the complaints have been about some of these specific things the former president said. He says here that in a new NDC administration, we must be prepared to work with the Judicial Council to build a roadmap that builds and renews public confidence in the judiciary. as a truly independent, transparent, and impartial arm of government. Is there anything wrong with this?
No, I mean, if I were, if I were an institution where research, from a credible source like the Afrobarometer is saying that citizens are beginning to have some trust issues with my institution, for me, my posture would be, what sort of signal do I take from this, right? I need a deep, sober reflection to ask myself, as an institution, what are my actions and inactions that may be rightly or wrongly fueling this notion that citizens have in their mind. It may reveal a lot of things. It could be something about process. It could be something about how a citizen was treated when they were. It could be a whole myriad of factors fueling that. And for me, if an institution is able to understand why that is occurring, I think it places that institution in a much stronger position to be able to understand how its actions and inactions are fueling that and how it can better address them. Because again, for me, it is critically important that even beyond the judiciary, that the trend that we are seeing about trust in our institutions is not something that continues, that people would really have, for me, much higher levels of trust in our institutions than is currently being captured in the Afrobarometer survey.
Now, but they have referenced history to them, the engagement of the political party and its antecedents, in this case, the PNDC, during whose tenure the abduction and the killing of the judges happened, gives them worry when there's consistent, let's say, remarks of this sort from people who hold predominantly relevant positions in the NDC. Is that a cause for worry?
I mean, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't believe that anyone is calling for a return to the dark days or trying to put the judiciary in a vulnerable position to be subjected to some of the rather, really unfortunate things that happened in the past. I don't think that is what these conversations and these comments are designed to do. But as I keep saying, it is, again, the challenge of how you talk about an institution like the judiciary without fueling some of these worries.
Now, there's one more thing. Maybe another quote would help us put it in perspective. Unfortunately, we have no hope that the current leadership of the judiciary can lead such a process of change. This is coming on the back of the one I just mentioned. We can only hope that a new Chief Justice will lead a process to repair the broken image that our judiciary has acquired over the last few years. First, the suggestion is that there can only be change if there's a change in the current leadership of the judiciary.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because, that is what leadership is about. If institutions are what I call learning institutions, where they take signals from these important things, reflect on them, and decide what can we do about it, then I would want to believe that the Chief Justice and all of his other administrators of the court system would be able to look at something like that and in good conscience and in good faith ask themselves, what can we do? Right? Yes, I know, different people may disagree that new leadership is required to turn some of these things around. But if I were the Chief Justice, I would actually take this up as a challenge and work with my fellow administrators of the court system and see if there is anything that can be done to be able to dispel and regain some of the lost trust that citizens have in the courts.
Which is also being put forward. This suggestion, let me now bring in, I think that we can actually speak to Professor Joseph Acquah on this one now. Prof, thank you so much. Hopefully the connection is working properly now. Prof, I was asking a question, and that's just what I was discussing with Professor John Osei-Kwapon. The conversation is from a background, and a Supreme Court judge has had cause to say they feel we are returning to the dark days where judges were abducted. And if we don't take care, those on the lunatic fringes of society will take advantage of some of these review to actually say or do the very things that we don't want repeated in the country. Do you think he is justified?
I'm not too sure, because if you are comparing 1982 to 2022, we have moved on. 2022, we are in a constitutional democracy. In 1982, we were under military rule. The whole issue about the independence of the judiciary is very important in terms of checks and balances. And the bastion of democracy rests with an independent judiciary. So, yes, as a human institution, the judiciary will receive negative comments, or its image may be broken. But then it depends on how the judiciary itself tries as much as possible to redeem its broken image. And I think we have qualified people of integrity within the judiciary. There may be a few bad nuts. In any institution, we may have a few bad nuts. So I think that the call by the Supreme Court judge may be taken out of context. And I don't think that he really meant that we are back to the 1982 days.
No, he actually said it signals something that gets them worried. And that's where he thinks this is going. Now, the point he's making is that it's perhaps people of the same political tradition. The NDC and the PNDC are related one way or the other. That when you say these things, people might take advantage of that to revisit those periods. That's actually his point.
I think that it is an overstretched point. I think even though the NDC came out of the PNDC, things have changed. We are living under constitutional rule. And so I will not take it that far. The main thing is that we should all try as much as possible and support the judiciary. Because honestly, to me, if you look at the three arms of government, the judiciary is the most important and credible one. The two others are over-politicized already. So I think that we as a country, we should support the judiciary and try as much as possible to maintain its independence. Because if we play with its independence, our democracy will be undermined.
The former president and others within the NDC have said that they are appointing partisan people to judicial positions, people who have contested positions in times past, people who belong to this government. And in fact, the accusation is to this government. And this government is appointing at various levels partisan people to various judicial positions. And to them, that's very worrying. Is it equally worrying to you if you think he is right?
Well, not quite one. The former president seems to be in the campaign mood, right? So he is entitled to his opinion. And then, of course, he's also a former president, so a private citizen and a former head of state. You see, when you are talking about political appointment, if you look at the Supreme Court, this is the 1992 Constitution is the only constitution where presidential appointments to the Supreme Court must receive approval of the legislature. And we have NDC and people in parliament. So are we saying that the NDC caucus did not do their job well in the vetting of Supreme Court judges? He also made a point about appointments to the other levels, the Court of Appeal, the High Court, and the Circuit Court. These things are neither here nor there. The main argument is that if you look at it, we want to appoint people of distinguished legal minds in the judiciary. Have we got that? I think that we've got that. It says that these are the requirements for appointment as as a high court judge, as a Supreme Court judge, as an appeal court judge? Have they met the criteria? They have met the criteria. So honestly, yes, he can speak. And then, of course, you know, the forum he used, NDC lawyer, he is also in the campaign mode. So why not? He's entitled to it. But I don't buy this whole idea that because the current president has the opportunity to appoint people, they are appointed party men. If you look at the Supreme Court, the appointments are actually approved, vetted by Parliament, and we have NDC people there. Were they sleeping? So honestly, we need to move away from this over politicization of issues. I think that's the bottom line, over politicization of issues, and address issues. I know that the judiciary itself has problems about logistics, about men, about a lot of things. So let us try and develop the capacity of the institution to perform. There are delays about, you see, one of the reasons why people, you know, say that they don't trust the judiciary is the delays. And the delays are caused by logistical problem, lack of personnel, and all that. Let us fix these problems and then say that, well, the judiciary must perform. But if we think of politicization and other issues, I think we are just beating about the bush.
I will come to the understanding of this. I will come to what the way forward should be. But there's a point I want to raise with you in what the former president has stated categorically and seek to find out from me whether this is in good taste or bad taste. Now, he said, unfortunately, we have no hope that the current leadership of our judiciary can lead such a change. We can only hope that a new Chief Justice will lead a process to repair the broken image that our judiciary has acquired over the last few years. This is what the former president believes in, that it will take a new leadership of the judiciary to actually change things, improve its image, and in the last few years, he said, has been acquired. Do you agree?
I'm not too sure. I think he himself has eaten back his word, because in the last interview, he was saying that, based on Justice Jones Doche's presentation of a speech behind the on behalf of the current Chief Justice, he thinks that there is hope. You see, again, if you are talking about reform, yes, you need leadership, but you need the institution itself. And I think we need to support the institution, the judiciary as an institution, and not one person. Because the Chief Justice, yes, is the head of the judiciary, but there are other justices of the Supreme Court who would help him. So again, I think that the choice of words may not be appropriate in this regard. And he himself has hit back his word based on the address presented by Justice Jones Doche on behalf of the Chief Justice.
Now, because of the history between the NDC, the PNDC, and also the judiciary in this country, should the former president have been more tempered in his speech anytime he spoke about the judiciary? Should he have left out words like unanimous FC and referencing what people have been saying on the streets about the judiciary?
Well, I think that he's entitled to his opinion. I will not take that away from him. I think that he has been peeved by the election petition, but we all know that you must produce evidence, and if you have not provided evidence, you may not get the right verdict. So again, yes, he can speak, but then he can speak his mind, but yes, still he needs to be more careful. And then, of course, he is one of the, I don't think he has considered defeat yet. So if you look at that, vis-a-vis his campaign move, you know, he's already in campaign move. So he wants to garner votes and all that. So I would not buy his idea that, well, the judiciary has broken its image has broken. Yes, it has broken, but we need to fix it. as a country. And he, as a former president, will need to help the judiciary to fix this problem. Of course, he is pointing out these weaknesses. And so how do we address that? I think he should also be looking at ways and means of fixing the weaknesses of the judiciary.
Now, there's a point, though, I want to raise with you. You just made reference to whether or not he has actually considered defeat. How relevant is that? How relevant is his concession or conceding defeat to anything? Because even the president feels that the former president is still peeved because he has not considered defeat.
Well, yes, I think he would have strengthened his democratic credentials if he had considered defeat. Because of the argument is that, well, I went to court, I was given a raw deal. Literally, that's what he's trying to say. But you see, you should also look at the fact that have you got the evidence? What evidence have you got? So I think that his democratic credentials are being weakened by his inability to concede defeat. Even though that, again, is his right. We can't force him to concede defeat. It's part of the game. But then it will be to his advantage if he is able to do that and then move on.
When you talk about evidence of rot in the judiciary, is it enough that the Ghanaian people do not trust it and that its reputation in the minds and in the trust of the Ghanaian people has gone very low? At least we just heard from Professor Acquah that that's what the Afrobarometer report is saying. All-time low trust in the judiciary.
I think trust is very important. Trust and confidence, they go together. And I think trust and confidence are linked to legitimacy of institutions. And you see, when people say that they don't trust the judiciary, of course, it may be perception and evidence of corruption. It may be the delays. And honestly, I have had some encounter with the courts, and most of it is about the delays. People get frustrated. I have seen litigants weeping in court because of the several delays. A case which would have taken 6 months will have taken 2 years. So I think that we should also be looking at the dispensation of justice in this country. And justice delayed is justice denied. So I believe some of the people were also talking about the dispensation of justice, the delays which are caused, leading to huge legal fees to litigants. Even though it says that, well, they can use alternative dispute resolution mechanism, yes, but then most people would like to settle the case in court. So I honestly, say that we should also be looking at the expeditious dispensation of justice to the people of Ghana.
I will bring in Professor Acquah for a second, but Professor Acquah, there's one more question I wanted to ask you. Now, whenever there has been comments like this from the former president and leading members of the NDC, there has been responses, and in most recent times, from the Attorney General. Do you think the opportunity he took, and NDC people have had problems with that, to respond to the things that the current leadership of the NDC has said, was the Attorney General right? Did he use the right platform? And was his language edifying?
Well, again, we may not question the forum, we may not question his language, but at least there must be some reciprocity when it comes to decorum. And I think that both parties have not exhibited decorous language when it comes to dealing with issues. And it's all the politics of equalization. You have done it in the past, so why we can also do it? So I'm sure the Attorney General will say that, oh, the former Attorney Generals have also used the same occasion to speak things which are not decorous. So I think that speaking from a decorous language must be embraced by both sides of the political divide. I think that's the way we can go.
Now, there's a point, though, that he has made. He says here that he feels, that's the Attorney General, with sore omission that there have never been other leaders of the NDC who have actually done the same things that the current leader of the NDC is doing. He calls it a systematic and deliberate campaign of hate against the judiciary. Is that something that you think is really what's happening?
Well, individuals will differ from the way they do things. So maybe because the current former president may have impeached, so maybe his approach to or his attitude to the judiciary may be seen to be hostile. But he's entitled to his views. Well, let us accept these things and move on with life. Move on. The key aspect is, are we promoting a just and free society? To me, that bothers me. So we should, yes, either sides may have wronged themselves, but we must have a way of coming together as a nation to deal with important issues about the promotion of a just and free, society in Ghana. That should be the bottom line.
Prof, I'll come back to you, and I'll come back to you so that we look into what going forward we can do differently. What are the very things that we should do to avoid some of these engagements and perhaps the battle of a sort between the current leadership of the NDC and the judiciary on one side, and also the leadership of the bar being the Attorney General's office and the other people involved. Let me bring Prof. Acquah into this conversation. Prof, the other conversation that's come up is whether or not this is unique to our experience. You are in the US. In other countries, do we see leadership of political parties go out of their way to take on, criticize the very people who are leading the judiciary, like we have seen happen in this country?
Well, I mean, I can speak about my experience in the US, and we are having all kinds of conversations about the Supreme Court, particularly when they issue hot, decisions on very politically hot cases, right? So if you think about a case like affirmative action, if you think of a case like same-sex relationships, if you think about issues like abortion, whenever the court has ruled, both sides, get extremely agitated in terms of their passions, gets very riled up. Their rhetoric is very fierce, whether it is rhetoric in defense of the decision or whether it's rhetoric in criticism of the decisions. People have had occasion to call our Supreme Court justices all kinds of names. I've had friends on the conservative side of the ideological spectrum who were not happy with the Chief Justice when he voted with the liberal side of the court to uphold Obamacare, for example.
Okay.
So it does happen. And as I mentioned, only last week, the US Chief Justice was raising the same concern, which was, it's fine if you disagree with us, it's fine if you criticize us, but make sure you don't go into a territory where you begin to call our legitimacy into question.
Now, I'll take a break. After this break, my guests, who are Professor Joseph Achuayi, who's a governance expert, and also Professor John Osai-Kwapon, he's a fellow, Democracy and Governance Fellow at the CDD. We've been having a conversation about the partisan politics on what we can do with the judiciary, the current conversations between the NDC and some judges and the judiciary as a whole. After this break, we'll be jumping into what can be done to bridge the gap, to improve the quality of our justice delivery system. You're welcome back. This is UPfront. My name is Raymond Acquah. Tonight, we'll be having a conversation on what's the way forward with the current criticism and counter-criticism and accusations and counter-accusations on the front of the opposition NDC and that of the judges on one side, and also the leadership of the bar being the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, and also the President. So you've heard in the last couple of days, especially at the bar conference, and before that, the former President John Dramani Mahama making comments about how the judiciary is expected to operate and how they are not doing so. And moving beyond that, the very comments of the man who is in charge of the Attorney General's department, that is Godfrey Dame, responding and making some more comments on this particular matter, then expanding it beyond that, the president also saying a lot more about this. We are seeking to find out what can be done going forward to make sure that there is harmony on that front, that there can be criticism without attempt to question the legitimacy of the current judiciary. I think that's what's been suggested here by my guest, and they've been joining and they've been kind enough to join us throughout this conversation. Democracy and Governance Fellow at CDD, Professor John Osai Kwapon, and also governance expert, political scientist, Professor Joseph Achuayi. And gentlemen, you're welcome back to UPfront. So, as a matter of fact, this is not the first time this conversation has come up. Do you get the impression that at some point in time, we can get to a point where both sides would agree that they can tone down and there will be less very, very strong criticism of the judiciary? Or you think this is good enough for democracy? Let me start with Professor Achuayi.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think that this is good for democracy. Democracy is also about debate and how you actually, tolerate the debate and then shape the debate to suit you. And I think both parties are trying to do these things. So yes, we are taking advantage of the debate in democracy, but let us shape it to suit us. It's fine. But then, as I said, we need more decorous language from both sides. The other thing is that we also need to reduce tension in the country. So if both parties are at each other's throat, it's not good for good governance. It's not good for the stability of the country. So I think that we must have a way of bringing the parties together again, the two parties, and see if they can talk. There must be, and the president of the republic should show the way, bring NDC, and then they can meet and discuss issues. I would love the president of the republic, as father of the nation, to bring on board the former president, have dinner with him or have something with him so that they can chat, they can discuss issues to reduce the polarization and tension in the country. So I think that, personality issues must come in. The other issue which I would like to flag is that, dispensation of justice is one of the basic functions of the modern state and the judiciary. Expeditious dispensation of justice. How can we do this? And one of the ways by which you can do this is to consistently develop the capacity of the judiciary. I have been to courtrooms, they are leaking. I've been to their washrooms, they are nothing to write home about. Crowded courts, they don't even have courtrooms and all the rest. So I think that we should also try to build the capacity of the judiciary, and then of course continuing legal education, for the judges will also be good. But then what is needed most is that how can we bring both sides together and talk and reduce the tension and then the over-polarization in the country.
I have a question for you, though. There's a question that the question is simple. Is Ghana's current judicial system fit for purpose?
Is it?
Is it fit for purpose?
I think so. I think so because we have the structures, but then we don't have the resources, right? So I think that if we can get enough budgetary support, enough personnel, because judges are few. You go to court and then, this judge has been transferred. Then it will take time for another 3 or 4 months for the next one to arrive. So we also need to increase the number of judges. I think with a holistic approach, a comprehensive fine-tuning of the structure we have, I think it's fit for purpose. Why not?
Now, that's
I believe in
interesting.
the judiciary. I mean, in spite of our problems, in spite of the problems we have with the judiciary, it's still rated as one of the best on the continent of Africa.
Let me ask that same question to Professor Acquah. Is Ghana's judiciary in its current form, mode and make, fit for purpose?
Most definitely. I agree with Professor Ayi, who says the much bigger issue is the dispensation of justice, right? And if you actually look at Afrobarometer, you see this also growing perception in how citizens have been answering two questions. Officials who commit crimes go unpunished, ordinary citizens who commit crimes go unpunished. And you're beginning to see a gap where there's this perception that if you're an ordinary citizen and you do something wrong, you never get away with it. But if you're an official and you do something wrong, you do get away with it. And so the point that Professor Ayi is making is spot on, which is beyond the issue of trust. You have to dig deeper to find out what is it that is fueling that mistrust. And part of that could be the manner in which justice is, dispensated. So if it takes too long a time, if people don't feel like the process treated them fairly, etc., all of those things can breed that sort of questions about, an institution like the judiciary. But overall, I don't think that we have a judiciary that is not fit. That is not fit for purpose.
I have a subsidiary question though to you, Professor Acquah. Now, the question directly is related to whether at any point in time we have sought to find out whether the people think that our judiciary is politicized.
No, but if you, I just penned an editorial, but if you actually also look at the question of trust in our institutions, and you break it down by party affiliation in terms of the party that people have said in Afrobarometer they feel close to, you would see actually a pattern. And that pattern is we seem to have slightly higher levels of trust in institutions when the party we say we feel close to is in power. Okay. And our trust levels dips when the party we feel close to is in opposition. And this is one of the questions I've raised over the years is, I wonder why that is. Why should my level of trust be strengthened because the party that I feel close to is in power? And why should that trust, change when the party that I feel close to is now in opposition? So again, those are some of the things that we would have to work through, because again, the role of the judiciary is just too critical in a democratic dispensation. The other quick point that I would make is that I think for a long time, at least as I have observed, our judiciary seemed to have been one of those institutions in sort of the background, doing their things, quote unquote, quietly, making their rulings, dispensation, justice, mediating conflict, etc., etc. But we are beginning to draw them a lot more into our political conflicts. And by that, we are going to the courts to get them to settle some politically touchy questions. So we've had 2 election petitions before the court. We've gone to, the composition of the 8th Parliament and the conduct of business has resulted in a number of questions, constitutional questions of a political nature being placed, on the place of the court to help us resolve. So I think some of these things is also bringing the court more into the limelight. And the more you bring them out to settle some of these politically difficult questions, you would end up having some of these quote unquote tensions and grievances between, among partisans, because again, you would feel some sort of, you feel a little aggrieved, to think that a particular political question was not settled the way you want to settle it. But when all is said and done, what makes our institutions strong and thrive is trust, especially the judiciary. It's the trust, it's the dispensation of justice, and it's also the ability of citizens to be able to accept the decisions of institutions even when they disagree with the decisions of those institutions. I mean, it doesn't mean that when a decision is quote unquote wrong, there aren't modalities or processes for appealing or trying to get it resolved again if there's some other way. But overall, I think that's the position that our judiciary is finding itself in. And I hope that going forward, partisans on both political divides would find a way to be able to express whatever legitimate grievances they may have against the court without treading into a territory that may seem to suggest that they are calling the courts into question, its legitimacy, and then it brings out all of the partisans, and we pitch against each other. Those things are helpful, but ultimately we must think of what can we do to ensure that our institutions deliver on the mandates that we've charged them to deliver. Because for me, ultimately, that is what matters. And if there are issues preventing them from doing that, let's have a conversation about it, because that's what democracy is about.
And I'm grateful to you for joining us from your base in the United States of America, and Professor John Osai Kwapong, who is a fellow of governance and democracy at the CDD, and for wonderfully putting in perspective the very issues surrounding the Afrobarometer and what it says about the judiciary, and all the wonderful views you shared with us tonight. Now, I would like to hear just a few words from you, Professor Acquah, if you have anything to wrap up with.
Well, the judiciary used to be a hallowed institution. And I think that we should try as much as possible to bring it back to that status or that position. And for this to happen, it will depend on the judiciary itself. It will depend on the other arms of government, enough budgetary support, and it will depend on the citizens of Ghana themselves, because actually justice emanates from the people. So they must protect the institution which is supposed to actually help in the dispensation of justice.
Very well. And I'm grateful to you too, Professor Acquah. Many thanks to you folks for joining us in today's edition of Upfront.